So, welcome to lecture number 126 of our study of Mora Nevuchim, of the Guide for the Perplexed. And we are currently in the middle of part 3, chapter 41. We are at page 566. And again, for those tuning in the Shlomo Penis edition, that is volume 2 of that edition, about to read the second paragraph on the page, which starts with the book of Judges. What Rambam is referring to here is not the biblical book of Judges. He's referring to his own book, Shoftim, in the Mishnah Torah, right? And where in his magnum halachic magnum opus, that where the Mishnah Torah, and he divides it into sections. So one of those sections is Sefer Shoftim, and most of it deals with the punishments and penalties and so on for various and how they're meted out and how they're not meted out, etc. But he puts in there other things, and one of those subjects that he discusses in the book of Judges is also the issue of destroying Amalek. Now, so that's what he's up to now, and he's about to describe what he believes to be the logical reason for Amalek, for the commandment to kill out the members of that nation. So again, so I'm on 566, that's 566, the second paragraph. The book of Judges includes also the commandment to destroy the seed of Amalek. For one particular tribe or nation ought to be punished, just as one particular individual is punished. That just like when a person does something wrong, he should be punished. When a nation does something wrong, the nation should be punished. And what's the reason? So that all tribes should be deterred and should not cooperate in doing evil. So that people as a nation shouldn't together as a country, together as a nation or a tribe, perpetrate evil, perpetrate wicked acts. For they will say, what will happen is, if the nation of Amalek suffers, is decimated, is wiped out because of their sins, because of what they had done wrong, then lest be done to us what was done to the sons of such and such a man, right? People will say we need to be careful on what we do as a group, right? In order that what shouldn't happen to us, like all the descendants of so-and-so in that group, something happened to them. Thus, even if there should grow up among them a wicked and corrupt man, who does not care about the wickedness of his soul, and does not think of the wickedness of his action, he will not find a helper of his own tribe to help him in the wicked things whose realization he desires. So Rambam is saying, if the purpose of killing out Amalek is so that the entire nation should feel responsible for the decisions of their leader. So if there was a wicked or an evil leader, right, the nation wouldn't go along with his wicked or evil plans. The obvious relevance to today is very stark and obvious. But and unfortunately, we found too many times in history where people go along with their wicked leader and actually help him perpetrate the evil that he intends to perpetrate. Accordingly, it was commanded that Amalek, who hastened to use the sword, Amalek, who was quick to kill, right, should be exterminated by the sword. That was his punishment. And just remember, the Rambam, as we've seen many times so far, believes in the idea of punishment as a deterrence, right? So, which was standard and still is standard in many circles, that the idea of giving a significant punishment for a bad act acts as a deterrent. Modern science, I'm not sure how much we believe in it. I mean, obviously, we believe that there should be punishments for crimes, right? That's something that society accepts as logical and reasonable. But he also, therefore, believes in, just as if there is a deterrence for individuals, there's a deterrence for a collective, right? For a group, for a nation. When a nation sees that another nation suffered terribly because that nation chose a bad path, right, then the people of that nation will therefore make sure in the future, or people of other nations will make sure in the future not to follow down a similar bad path. But since Amalek, their sin was killing, their extermination was commanded to be by being killed. But on the other hand, Ammon and Moab, those two nations, who acted in a vile manner and caused harm by means of a stratagem, they harmed us when we were wandering in the desert, but not through killing us. So they harmed us in a different way, right? They harmed us. They were punished only by the prohibition against becoming related them to marriage. Their punishment was that they were not allowed to marry into their families, by being considered worthless and by their friendship being shunned, right? To stay away from them and not be friends because of their behavior. All these matters belong to the divine estimation of penalties, so that these should not be too great or too small, as he made it clear according to his wickedness, right? Midah keneged midah, right? That if their wickedness was because they were murderers, then they should be killed. If their wickedness was other issues, then punishments are different. Another thing which is mentioned in the book of Shoftim, so because the book of Shoftim deals with issues of leadership and kings and armies and so on, this following law also makes its way into the book of Shoftim, into the Rambam's book, where he discusses the laws of judges and courts. So this next paragraph is that just, if you wonder what this has to do with judges and courts, well, that's what it is, because judges and courts talk about judges, leadership, kings, armies, etc. So one of the things the Torah says is we should prepare a place and a paddle. In other words, a place to go for to relieve yourself, and it says paddle here, but I don't know how anyone would use that term in modern English. You would call it a shovel or a spade or something like that. So for one of the purposes of his law consists, as I have made known to you, in cleanliness and avoidance of excrements and of dirt, and in man's not being like the beasts. So the Torah commands us that when we go to war, when we go to battle, make sure we take along means of waste disposal, and people shouldn't just relieve themselves just anywhere. They should have a place to do it. Now, so even, and it's written in the context of a battle, of a camp, of a military camp. And this commandment also fortifies, by means of the actions it enjoins, the certainty of the combatants, that the indwelling, in other words, the Shekhinah, God's presence, has descended among them, as is explained in the reason given for them. For the Lord thy God walketh in the midst of thy camp. So, in other words, in the presence of a military campaign, presumably we're referring to a military campaign that has an appropriate and lofty goal to protect the people from an enemy that threatens them. So then, remember that God resides in that camp, and therefore you should keep it holy and not keep it dirty. It also included another notion, saying that he has seen no unclean in thee, and turn away from thee. This being against that which, as is well known, very often we know it is widespread among soldiers in a camp after they have stayed for a long time away from their homes. The ideas of cleanliness and the way people talk, the way people act, the way people behave. Probably have not seen too many war movies where people aren't, talking in vulgar manners and acting in vulgar ways. And that's what the Rambam is saying the Torah wants us to avoid. Accordingly, he may be exalted, has commanded us to perform actions that may call to mind that the Shekhinah, that God's presence, has descended among us, so that we should be preserved from these actions. And it said, therefore thy camp shall be holy, that he shall see no unclean thing in thee. I just got to the top of page 567 now. He has even commanded that a man who has polluted himself by night, right? If if a person had a seminal emission of semen at night, so he should go out of the camp until the sun sets, and afterward he may come into the camp. Now remember that the Chachamim, and this has happened several times, many times until now in these past few chapters, where the rabbis derive different types of laws from this that have nothing to do with military camps. And remember, the Rambam told us a few times that he's specifically focusing on the verses as they appear in their context in the Torah itself, right? So this here is mentioned in the context of a military camp, and therefore that's how he says it. The fact that halachically we apply it to different types of situations is not relevant here, right? So accordingly, everyone should have in his mind that the camp is like a sanctuary of God, and not like the camps of the Gentiles, destined only to destroy and to do wrong and to harm others and rob them of their property. This camp is here for a holy, proper purpose. This camp is not here to rob and pillage and destroy and so on. That's not what we're here for. We're here for something much higher, much loftier. It makes it important to recognize and remember the goals and the aims of the battle and of the military camp. On the contrary, our purpose is to make people apt to obey God and introduce order in their circumstances. Our purpose is not to attack and to rob and to destroy. Our purpose is actually to bring the others into the fold of God, and therefore improve their own lives. So Rambam is making a remarkable statement here that ultimately a war should not be meant to destroy our enemy, but war should be meant to bring our enemies into the right fold, and that's what the proper war is for. The applications of this in modern times and the ramifications are of all of the things we've said now. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but something that we should all think about and remember when we talk about war today, that the purpose of war is not to destroy our enemy. That's what the Rambam just said. I mean, it wasn't me that said that. It was he that said that. And he understands the Torah to be teaching us this lesson, and so on. I have already made it known to you that I shall give reasons for the biblical text according to its external meaning. That's the Rambam reminding us. I mentioned it before. I forgot that he was going to say it himself, that these verses are applied in all sorts of ways in the halachic literature from which the various rules are derived that have nothing to do with wars. But the Rambam is specifically discussing the way it appears in the Torah in its biblical context. Any comments so far? Questions, issues?
I just had one small issue.
Sure.
Didn't Moses argue with God the opening about Amalek and the whole people being destroyed because their leader is a bad guy? Why can't you look for 50 people there, or 30 people, or 10 people?
Well, that wasn't Amalek, that was Sodom. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I know, but the argument you said, the reason that you have to describe a whole nation and why Amalek should not be able to cooperate in doing evil is they're saying, hey, we'll all be destroyed. So what
oh, you
about?
mean and even though that is a definite contrast with the story of Sodom, where
Yeah,
the people
exactly.
would have been saved because there are some righteous ones within them.
Right.
Right, I understand. That's a very good question. I don't know how to answer that offhand, but it is definitely a major contrast, or maybe contradiction would be more appropriate. I'm sure we can definitely think about that, and I'll have to think about that a little bit. But the I mean, one of the obvious differences is I don't know. I can't think of
Well,
anything.
what about this? In Sodom, they weren't out to kill everyone around them necessarily, like eliminate the Jews.
Uh-huh.
So maybe there were some righteous people you would save, but if a whole nation is out to get you, then that's another story. And
Okay. Well,
that's the
yeah.
way I would differentiate those. I mean, in my mind, that's the way I differentiate it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so Sodom, the people of Sodom were not out to kill us. They were out to. They just were corrupt in all kinds of ways. But that's a good point. Yes, I like that. Thank you. Yeah, that sounds like the truth. so so then the next law is the law of the beautiful captive woman, which it makes sense to actually read the verses in the Torah on this, because now I want you to not right now, and the Rambam will be consistent with what he's been doing and what he just did. He's interpreting the verses here based on their context and the way they appear in the Torah, and not based on all of the many laws and derivations and understandings of this that we find in halacha. In the Rambam's book Mishnah Torah, he records all the laws, all the halachot, and so on, and he consistently writes it the way our rabbis derived it. But when here in Mor Nevuchim, he's focusing on the verses and how they appear in context. So I want to read those verses to you for a moment, because and if it conflicts with something you may have thought or heard or once understood about this particular paragraph in the Torah, it's probably the result of that conflict is probably because you remember learning something from the rabbis about how they derive it, how they understand it, as opposed to what the verses actually say. So let's just look at what the verses actually say. So it starts as follows. It says, Ki tetzei la milchama alevecha. This is in Devarim or Deuteronomy 21, verse 10. When you go out to war against your enemies, unisano Adonai alecha biyadecha, and God will put your enemies in your hand, they'll deliver them into your hands, vishavisa shivyo, and you will capture some of their captives. That's what always happens in war. You win, you take prisoners of war. And among the captives, you see Eshet Reisa. It seems to be directed at an individual. Eshet Yifat Torah, a beautiful woman. And you desire her. And you take her for yourself for a woman. So this is a description of an event. It's not a permission saying you should do this or you could do that, or even it's just describing what happens and what unfortunately happens in war. Now, remember, in those days, the usual way it happened was the victor would rape and pillage and destroy and then take everyone else that they wanted to as slaves. And we have to remember that in context. We're not talking about a time after the Geneva Convention. We're talking about when the normal order of business, when war happened, was for the victor to kill, rape, pillage, and then take captives. And if they saw a woman they liked, they would just grab her and make her their slave. And that's just the way it was. So, but here the Torah says, now you have done this, you've taken these captives, and you've taken her li'isha as a wife. It doesn't say you've taken her, it's like you took her as a wife. So in other words, it's not recognizing any permission to do anything with her other than the intent to take her as a wife, which is very different already than what used to happen in those days, which most of the time they were not taken as wives, they were taken as slaves, and of course sexually abused. But the idea of a wife already puts her on a different level. I'm not saying that this would be considered okay in modern times. I'm not saying that at all, but you have to understand this in context. And what do? The Torah says, verse 12, you take her into your house, and you will shave her hair, and allow her to cut her nails, right? So right away, again, it says you take her into your house. You don't throw her into the barn. You don't throw her into a jail cell. If you're already abusing her, you're obligated to take her into your house and treat her like a person, right? Help her, have her get cleaned up. She has get rid of the clothing of her captivity. So you don't put her in an orange jail jumpsuit, right? You don't put her in the clothing, in chains and in clothing that she wore as a captive, which would identify her as different. And she must live in your house, right? You can't discard her. You can't leave her out in the field. You can't leave her in a barn, right? Certainly not in a jail cell, right? Like she must live with you in your house. And she must be allowed to mourn her family, her mother and her father, which she just lost in a terrible war. And after you take her into your house, you treat her like a human being, and you help her get cleaned up, and you give her some nice clothes to wear, and you let her mourn for 30 days. Then then you are allowed to sleep with her, right, and have intercourse with her. And she should be your wife, with all of the privileges that a wife should have. And if you do not desire to have her as a wife, you have to send her home. If you can't sell her away as a slave, do not sell her for money, right? Because you have forced her, you have imposed your will upon her sexually, and therefore you have to treat her, you have to let her go free, and you cannot abuse her anymore. So this is not necessarily how you and I might advise somebody is a similar situation today, right? But that's not the point. We have to remember this in context of what wars and battles were then. So the Rambam is about to say, because in the book of Shoftim, the Rambam discusses in Mishnah Torah all of the laws having to do with judges and kings and governments, and he also attaches to that the laws of war, like we just saw. So he's also discussing this law, which is the law of war. This book also includes, I'm at the second paragraph on page 567, also includes the law concerning the beautiful captive woman. You know their dictum. Here the Torah only speaks in consideration of concupiscence. I don't even know what that means. But basically, what does that mean?
Lust. I just looked at lust.
Okay, yeah. It's, in other words, the Torah is only talking because it knows what happens in war. I mean, it's not condoning it. It's not recommending it. Certainly not. But it's just, this is what happens. So because it happens, and the Torah knows that it happens, the Torah therefore says, nevertheless, the commandment includes an exhortation to noble moral qualities, which excellent men must acquire in a way I shall indicate. For though his concupiscence overcomes him, his desire, his lust overcomes him, and patience is impossible for him, right? It's hard for him to wait. It's hard for him to hold himself back. The Torah still says he must obligatorily bring her to a hidden place, as it says, home to thine house. The Rambam is understanding this verse to mean that he's not allowed to have his way with her in the field, in the battlefield. He has to take her home, and then he can, under these specific circumstances. And as the sages have explained, he is not permitted to do her violence during the war. He's not allowed to. So the Torah is prohibiting rape in battle. It's not saying, oh, we understand your lust and therefore it's okay. The Torah is saying, no, it's not okay, right? And he is not allowed sexual intercourse with her for the second time before. And so he brings her home. He sleeps with her, right? And then he says, you got to leave her alone before her grief has calmed down and her sorrows been quieted. Leave her alone for 30 days. She should not be permitted to grieve, to be disheveled, and to weep, as the text says, and she shall bewail her father and mother, and so on. For those who grieve find solace in weeping and arousing their sorrow until their bodily forces are too tired to bear this affection of the soul, until they learn over time how to move on from the terrible tragedy that happened. Just as those who rejoice find solace in all kinds of play, the people that are sad find solace in crying and mourning. It's a normal process of grieving. Therefore, the Torah had pity on her and gave her the possibility to do so until she is weary of weeping and grieving. You know that he can have sexual intercourse with her while she is still a Gentile, right? Because that's what happened the first time, right? She hasn't been converted to Judaism, right? And she hasn't become his wife, right? She may also, for 30 days in public, profess a religion, right? We're not forcing her to convert even. We're letting her maintain her own native religious practices, whatever they were, right? Even in an idolatrous cult, and may not during that period be taken to task because of a belief. And we can't be upset with her for sticking with whatever her beliefs were from her previous life for the nation that she was part of. With all, if he does not succeed afterwards to convert it to the statutes of the Torah, right? So that what the Rambam is hinting here, not hinting, he's saying that if she does not want to convert, right? And right, if she does not succeed to convince her, right, she may not be sold or treated as a slave. You can't say, oh, I'm going to treat her as a slave or I'm going to sell her away, right? For the law, the Torah safeguards her inviolability on account of her having shown herself naked in sexual intercourse, even if this has happened through a certain act of disobedience. I refer to having then been a Gentile, right? And says, and the Torah says, withal, thou shalt not make merchandise of her because thou hast humbled her. In other words, you're not allowed to force her. He's not allowed to force her to be his wife, right? He's not allowed to force, if she doesn't want to convert to Judaism, then he has to send her home in a respectful manner and treat her like a human being, even if that means that she's still professing religion. You can't go ahead and say, oh, you're an infidel, and therefore, and unfortunately, these are things that we have seen in our time. Well, they're an infidel, so we're going to sexually exploit them. Accordingly, it has become clear that this commandment contains encouragement to a noble moral quality. The reasons for all the commandments contained in this book, meaning the book of Judges from the Mishnah Torah, have accordingly become clear. So this, I know chapter 41 was very long, but it is what it is. So that concludes chapter 41, and then he's going to move on. Remember, he divided into 14 classes. So the next one is chapter 42, where he talks about the seventh class, laws of property. So it's a good time to stop and take questions or comments before we move on. Go ahead, Yosef.
First of all, in the laws of kings, he doesn't mention this per se, because like you said, it was already mentioned in other laws. And the second thing is that the fact that they understood the psychology of the war and everything that's around it is just amazing, because Rambam in the laws of kings and their wars says that a man going to battle must forget his family. Obviously, he's not truly forgetting them. It's just that he doesn't concentrate on them. And when we were in Lebanon, that was actually one of the rules that the commanders told us: do not hang out with the population, whether male or female. And just wanted to say that it's still being kept today, as far as I know. So
yeah, that definitely should be. But it's still being kept, I hope. But also, unfortunately, we see too many places where it's not being kept, and so we just need to, we need to stick with it.
yeah, that's why I was saying the Jewish army is still very different from the other countries and their behavior.
All right. So yes, no, very good. Thank you. Any other comments before we move on? If not, we'll go ahead to chapter 42. So the commandments comprised in the seventh class, so it's on page 568, are the laws concerning property. They are those that we have enumerated in a portion of the book of Judgments, right? Sefer Mishpatim in the Mishnah Torah, and a portion in the book of Acquisition, Sefer Kinyan in the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. So all of them have an evident reason. They're all obvious, for they consist in an estimation of the laws. And by this part, most of it I'm going to probably go through pretty quickly because it's very self-evident. But we'll still find things interesting and stop and talk if we find them. So all of them have an evident reason, for they consist in an estimation of the laws of justice with regard to transactions that of necessity occur between people. People deal, they make business, they have transactions with each other, and see to it that these do not deviate from a course of mutual help for both parties. The laws of transactions generally are designed in such a way that one person doesn't take advantage of another, and when people make a deal, each person walks away with what he or she went into the deal trying to achieve. If you wanted to buy something, you give $10, you get $10 worth of merchandise, you go home, right? So it's an even deal. Lest one of them should aim at increasing his share in the whole and being the gainer in all respects, as opposed to a deal in which one person walks away with everything and the other person walks away with nothing, or at least some form of imbalance. First and foremost, there should be no swindling in buying and selling, right? You don't, if you sell me something, you have to make sure you're selling me a proper product. You can't sell me a piece of garbage and tell me it's something great. And only the usual and habitually recognized profits should be sought. If it's understood that the normal profit margin in this industry is 5%, then that's how much you should make on your thing. Don't overcharge me because you want to make 20% on this deal. If that's not what's accepted in the market, based on what's accepted in that market. Conditions have been laid down under which the contract becomes valid, and swindling, even if it consists in mere words, has been forbidden, as is well known. Just lying and convincing people and so on is just forbidden. Then there's the law of four trustees, the law of the four types of shomrim, the four types of guardians. So, like, if I come to you and ask you, hey, could you watch my goat for me, right? So there's four types of people, right, that could do it, right? You can do it what's called a shomer chinam. You do it just as a favor. I ask you for a favor. Hey, could you watch my house? Could you watch my car? Whatever. Could you take care of my pet? Whatever it is, right? That's a shomer chinam. You can also have a shomer sachar, which is I could say, hey, I'll pay you $20, $20 an hour for you to watch my cat or whatever, right? And then there's a shomer socher, where you come to me and say, I want to rent your car for a day. If I'll give you $100, I'll rent your car. So there you're a socher. You're paying me to use my car, right? As opposed to me paying you to watch my car, right? And then there's a borrower where you say, hey, can I borrow your car to go to the store? And I say, okay, here, take the car. So you borrow it. So those are the 4 types of shomrim. It is manifest in what way it is just and equitable. It's obvious as we go through these laws how logical and just and equitable the rules are. For the trustee who keeps a deposit gratuitously and derives no advantage whatever from this business and merely exercises charity is not responsible for anything. If you say, I'm going to do you a favor and I'll watch fill in the blank for you, right, and something happens to that thing, you're not responsible for it because you had no gain. You were doing it. It was just a favor to me, right? And every accident that may happen is borne by the person that owns the property. I'm trusting you, but I understand. You're doing me a favor. So if something happens, I take the loss, not you. A borrower, though, who has all the advantages, you borrow something from me, I'm doing you a favor, I gain nothing, right? You get all the gain. You get a chance to use my car, and I get nothing except for sitting around hoping you don't get into a car accident, right? So the borrower has all the advantage, whereas the owner of the property exercises charity with regard to him. So therefore, the borrower is responsible for everything, and all accidents that may happen are paid for out of the purse of the borrower. All these are derived from the verses in the Torah, mostly in Parshat Mishpatim, but regardless. So the Rambam is just explaining the logic behind these rules. As for him who takes charge of a deposit in consideration of a salary, right, and the lesser, so in other words, a person who I pay you to watch my thing, right, or you pay me to rent my thing, to lease my thing, each one of them, I mean the trustee and the owner, participates in the advantage. Now it's a transaction. If I'm renting you my car, I gain $100 and you gain my car, right? If I'm paying you to watch my car, so I'm giving you $100 and I'm getting an advantage because you're watching my car and you're getting an advantage because you're getting $100. So either way, it's a deal in which we both walk away with gain. So therefore, damages from accidents are divided between them. If something happens by accident, it gets divided. But those that are due to lack of care, but if you're negligent, right? If you rent my car and you decide to take it mud riding and it's not a 4x4 appropriate for that, and it gets damaged and ruined, well, that's negligence. Then you're responsible. But if it's something that happens it's paid for out of the purse of the trustee, as when the thing is stolen or lost. Similar for theft, because theft or loss shows that he had neglected measures of great prudence and exceeding precautions. Usually when things get lost, it's because you weren't watching it well. If things get stolen, it's because you didn't take care to make sure you parked it in a safe place, etc. On the other hand, damages from such accidents can be prevented by no device. It gets hit by lightning, or there's a hailstorm and it gets slammed, or some tree just lands on it, whatever. Accidents, as when the beast that has been lent is crippled or carried off or died. Then when circumstances are beyond one's control, then it's borne by the purse of the owner of the property. Then the owner has to just deal with it. So those are the rules of Shomrim, and Rambam just explains the obvious logic behind the laws of the different types of guardians or trustees of things. Then exceeding kindness is shown. There's also the law of a hired person, right? A hired person in general is a person who doesn't have a lot of money, right, and doesn't have a lot of land to do his own land. So you hire him to help, plow your land and pick your tomatoes, right? So a hired hand, the exceeding kindness is shown to him because of his poverty, because generally he's poor. He's not taking this job because he loves picking tomatoes, right? He's taking this job because he needs to make a living, and this is all he can do, so he does it. So it's been commanded he receive his wages promptly, and he should in no way be cheated out of his due, right? That you absolutely have to pay a person right away that day, right? Unless, it's in a place where it's accepted, in a market where it's accepted, to pay every 2 weeks. But you make sure that on that payday you pay, right? And you always make sure you pay him appropriately according to the appropriate market rate. I mean that he should be recompensed according to the value of his service. It is a matter of pity for him that he or even a beast must not be prevented from eating some of the food on which they work. He's allowed to, if he's working on your tomatoes and he wants to pop a tomato in his mouth while he's working, it's totally fine and appropriate, and he must be allowed to do that. In the same way, even if you have an animal working for you, and the animal, you're not allowed to put a muzzle on the animal is doing work for you, it's appropriate to allow the animal to eat a little bit as they do the work, according to the statutes of this Torah, right? The third paragraph, the statutes concerning property also comprise inheritance, right? This also within these laws. So herein is involved an excellent moral quality. I mean that a man should not withhold a good thing from one deserving it. Accordingly, when he is going to die, he should not begrudge his heir and squander his property and say, I'm about to die and I'm going to take I have $100,000 in the bank. I'm going to bet it all on a horse in a race and gone. On the contrary, you should leave it to him who among all the people deserves it most, namely his next of kin, his relative, unto his kinsman that is next to him of his family. As is well known, it is explained that this is the first of all, the child, and the brother, then the paternal uncle. And he should grant preference to the eldest of his children because his love for him came first. And he should not follow his inclination. He may not make the son of the beloved wife the firstborn, and so on, right? You give it to the firstborn, and that's the proper convention, whether you liked his mother better or you liked the other mother better or whatever, if you had more than one wife. This most just law safeguards and fortifies this moral quality. I refer to taking care of relatives and protecting them. That's the bottom line. We take care of our family. You know what the prophet says, but he that is cruel afflicts his own kinsman. The real cruelty, like the highest level of cruelty, is someone who can be cruel to his own family. In the text of the Torah, when it speaks of tzedakah, of alms, unto thy brother, to thy poor, and so on. The sages, may the memory be blessed, plays very much the character of the individual who causes his relatives to be close to him. And they mention you marry your sister's daughter, which is one of the relatives which is not prohibited by the Torah. So by marrying her, you're helping your family. At least that's how it was looked at in those times. All right. The Torah has taught us that one must go exceedingly far indeed in the exercise of this moral quality. Namely, man ought to take care of his relative and grant very strong preference to the bond of the womb, right? Just the idea of taking care of family. I mean, Rambam lived in a Islamic society where this was a very, and to this day is very strong value, but it's a value for all of us to have. We all understand that we're supposed to take care of our family, even if his relative should do him an injustice and a wrong. He should be extremely corrupt. Even if your relative is really not the greatest guy in the world, to put it mildly. Even if your relative didn't treat you well and hasn't been treating you well, don't say, I'm cutting him off. Unfortunately, nowadays we have so many children, they get into a fight with their parents and I'm not having anything to do with them. And they go for 10 years and don't even give them a text message or a phone call. It doesn't work that way. He must nevertheless regard his kinsman with a protective eye. Always look out for your relative. He may be exalted, says, thou shalt not abhor an Edomite, for he is thy brother. It says, even an Edomite, who we mentioned before, who didn't treat us well, we should still not hate them because they're our brothers. They're the descendants of Esau, right? They're our cousins. Similarly, everyone of whom you had need someday, there was a time when we needed them and he helped me, anyone, even if he's not your relative. One time he was my good friend, and one time he helped me get through a problem I had in life, right? Everyone who was useful to you and whom you found in time of stress, and he was good to me then. Even if afterwards he treated you ill, even if later on he wasn't so great, ought necessarily to have merit attaching to him because of the past. Don't forget the favors he did for you when he was nice. So if you had a good friend, just because they turned against you, don't completely dump them from, and have nothing to do with them anymore. Remember that you still owe them a debt of gratitude. He may be exalted, says, thou shalt not abhor an Egyptian because thou wast a stranger in his land. And it is generally known how greatly the Egyptians vexed us afterwards, right? The Torah says that the Egyptians, there was a time early on in our exile when the Egyptians welcomed us into their land and they gave us property and they gave us a place. And one of our own was a high up official in their land. And they greeted us with open arms in a time of starvation when we needed a place to go, right? Of course, then they spent several hundred years enslaving us and murdering us, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But don't forget the favor they did when they did the favor. So there's still something you owe them. It's a pretty remarkable statement. See then how many noble moral qualities we learn from these commandments. So all these commandments, they make sense. We learn from them so many things. The two last mentioned do not belong to the seventh class, By the way, he says what I told you, the mitzvah about not abhorring an Egyptian, and the previous one, that I don't actually discuss them in those books of laws, right? The laws, in other words, the laws of business, right? The laws of transactions, which is really the topic of the chapter. I kind of got off topic, but speaking of the care to be taken of relatives' inheritance, since I started talking about inheritance, which is part of the laws of transactions, I got on the subject of the Egyptians and the Edomite because they're family, because inheritance is family, yada yada, etc. So forgive me for going off track, the Rambam says, so he's forgiven. So now we're at chapter 43, to the 8th class. Before I do that, I would like to again open the floor for any comments or questions. Well, I told you that it would be pretty straightforward, so we can move on to 43. I doubt we'll finish this one. It's a little long, but if we get started now, then next week we'll probably finish it. The commandments comprised in the 8th class are the commandments that we have enumerated in the book of times. That is the Sefer Zimanim, which is one of the books of Mishnah Torah, in which he discusses all the laws related to times, meaning the laws of Shabbat, of Sabbath, the laws of Pesach, the laws of Sukkot, the laws of Yom Tov, of all the holidays, anything that has to do with the seasons and times of the Jewish calendar year. Those laws are all discussed in Sefer Zimanim. So the Rambam here is telling us that that's the 8th group. The biblical texts give us the reasons for all of them except a few. In generally, when the Torah tells us about a holiday, Pesach, it tells us why we're celebrating Pesach, and Sukkot, why we're celebrating Sukkot. So for the most part, the Rambam says the Torah is pretty explicit as to the reason. So I don't need to sit here and make up reasons. You just read the verse and you'll know the reason, right? With regard to the Sabbath, the reason for it is too well known to have need of it being explained. I don't need to sit here and waste time telling you about how wonderful Shabbat is and what the reason for Shabbat is, for it is known how great a rest it procures. We all know it's logical, it's reasonable. Remember, Rambam is specifically referring to reasons. All of the reasons he's given, I'm going to remind everyone again, right? These are all very rational, reasonable things that have to do with basic social science, basic behavioral science, basic everything he said until now in all the past chapters when he's discussing the reasons. He has never resorted to anything spiritual or supernatural or anything like that, and that's extremely deliberate and it's extremely important. The Rambam is trying to explain to us, based on his understanding of science and human behavior, etc., right? These things make sense. They're logical, they're reasonable, and they make sense. So he's not, of course, you can talk about the spiritual greatness of Shabbos, but that's not the point of these chapters here. The point of these chapters is to tell us that Shabbos makes sense. It just makes sense. And why? Because it is known how great a rest it procures. Because of the mitzvah of Shabbat, the 7th part of the life, in other words, 1/7 of all of our lives, those of us that keep Shabbat, of every individual, consists in pleasure and repose from the fatigue and weariness from which there is no escape either for the young or for the old. Life is full of exhaustion. It's full of things that tire us out, tear us down, wear us down. And because Shabbos is mandated that we stop from all of that and rest, we therefore have at least 1/7 of the time of our sojourn on this planet is rest and relaxation and something wonderful. At the same time, it perpetuates, in addition to that, it also perpetuates and throughout the period of time an opinion whose value is very great, namely the assertion that the world has produced in time, right? The idea that there's a creator, right? That God created the world, that the world is not eternal like Aristotle thought, but the world was created by a creator, which is why we rest. So those are two very obvious reasons for Shabbos that make sense, right? The fast of the Day of Atonement, what about the fast of Yom Kippur, right? Also has an evident reason consisting in establishing the notion of repentance, right? That fast, it helps us understand and learn the idea of repentance, of teshuvah, of fixing our ways, mending our ways, repenting and becoming better people. It is the day on which the master of the prophets descended with the second tablets of the law, right? It's the day when Moshe came with the second set of luchot. and brought them the good news that their great sin was forgiven. So because of that day was the day that happened, right? This day became forever a day of repentance exclusively consecrated to divine service. All we do on that day is worship God. Therefore, one must abstain on it from all corporeal pleasure and from all effort with a view that to what is useful to the body. We ignore all those things that we do for our bodies, and we concentrate only on our spirit. I mean, from work in various crafts and confine oneself to confessions, meaning vidoi, right, to confess your sins, and to turning away from them. So that it makes sense to have a day of the year in which we engage in these activities. We get rid of all of things that are relative to our personal pleasures and our personal needs and our bodily needs, and we focus only on our spiritual needs and coming back to God. So we don't need too much of an explanation for that. The festivals are all for rejoicing and pleasurable gatherings. All of the holidays, right? In general, our point of it is for people to be happy and get together, right? To get together with their friends, their family, which in most cases are indispensable for man. People need that, right? It's important. He doesn't have to go on a whole explanation as to why social gatherings with the people that we love and care about and enjoy spending time with is important. And they are also useful in the establishment of friendship. It also builds relationships. It's not just getting together with the same old people every year. It builds relationships with new people. You invite new guests, and you build friendships among people, which must exist among people living in political societies. The word political here is kind of an old word from 100 years ago English when he wrote this translation, maybe not quite 100, but long enough. Now it means in social, and socially connected societies, right? There's a particular reason for every one of these days. In each and every one of the particular, so that's a general reason for holidays, but then each holiday has a general idea behind it. So the account of Passover, Pesach, everyone generally know, and people know the story of Pesach. I don't have to tell you the whole story. It lasts for 7 days. For the period of 7 days is the mean between the natural day and the lunar month. Why 7 days, right? Because I'm not sure exactly what he means here. Give me 1 second. I'm going to look in. The way they translate it in the Goodman Lieberman edition is they translate it as follows. It's a span between a natural day and a lunar month. A 7-day period, as you know, is vital in nature, but also in scripture. I honestly, I don't know what it means. If someone could help me, I don't know what that means between a mean between the natural day and the lunar month. Maybe a lunar month is 28 days, which is divisible by 7. But it's not exactly 28 days, but all right, whatever it means. Anyway, you know already that this period plays a great role in natural matters. The things go by 7s. But remember, the Rambam was thinking in a time when they thought there's 7 spheres and all kinds of 7s. I'm not sure that 7 is nowadays thought to be, in modern science, to be any particular importance or not, but who knows? Maybe it is. Anyway, regardless, it's definitely considered to be a pattern in the Torah, that's for sure. And it certainly governs our lives because that's the length of a week. I don't know what came first, though. But anyway, it does so likewise in matters pertaining to the Torah. For the Torah always tends to assimilate itself to nature, perfecting the natural matters in a certain respect. Torah always corresponds to the real world that we live in, the nature of the world that we live in, right? So her nature is not endowed with thought and understanding, whereas the Torah is the determining, ruling, and governance of the deity who grants the intellect to all its possessors. This, however, is not the purpose of this chapter. So I'm just getting off track here, Rambam is saying. He started getting totally off track, talking about the idea that the Torah is really giving meaning, giving spiritual meaning to the general humdrum of nature, the rhythms of nature. The Torah is giving meaning to it. That started taking him off on a direction which we've dealt with a lot in the previous several, I don't know how many chapters of the book. But right now, that's not his point. So this is not the purpose of this chapter. We shall accordingly return to the matter with which we are dealing with. Let's get back to the subject. So I don't need to waste too much time discussing Pesach with you, Passover, because everybody knows Passover. So what about Shavuot, which is coming up soon? The festival of weeks, or the Shavuot, is the day of the giving of the Torah. In order to glorify and exalt that day, the days are counted from the first of the festivals up to it. We count, right? As is done by one who waits for the coming of the human being he loves best and counts the days and the hours, right? That's what human beings do. When you're looking forward to something, you count how many days, until such and such happens. This is the reason for the counting of the Omer from the day when they left Egypt until the day of the giving of the Torah, which was the purpose and the end of their leaving, and brought you unto myself. The whole point of leaving Egypt was that we should receive the Torah, and that would be the covenant between us and God. This great gathering only lasted one day. Accordingly, it's commemorated every year during one day only. If, however, the eating of unleavened bread would so why not Pesach? Why is that more than 7 days? Because if I only told you that you're not allowed to eat chametz for a day, right? You're not allowed to eat unleavened bread for a day, you probably wouldn't remember, because just one day, there's lots of days that we don't eat bread. Today I just had rice. I didn't have bread, whatever, you just didn't have bread. But if you go for a whole week, then you'll remember it, right? You wouldn't take notice, meaning wouldn't be clear. So for man often eats one kind of food for 2 or 3 days, right? 2 or 3 days, you're eating just tomatoes because that's what you have left in your fridge and you want to finish them before they go bad, right? So that's all you eat for 2 days. But then after that, you start eating something else, right? For man, accordingly, the meaning of the eating unleavened bread only becomes clear, and the account with which it's connected only becomes generally known through its being eaten for a complete period, which is, as he said, 7 days. New Year, that's Rosh Hashanah, lasts similarly for 1 day. It's also a 1-day holiday. At least, biblically, that's what it's mandated to be. It's a day of repentance in which the attention of the people is called to their negligence. Therefore, the shofar is blown. As we have explained in Mishnah Torah, Rambam explains in Mishnah Torah that the blast of the shofar wakes us up, etc. It is, as it were, a preparation for the day of the fast, which we already discussed, right? Accordingly, it is generally accepted in the tradition of the religious community that the 10 days from New Year to the Day of Atonement should be observed, the 10 days of repentance. We're getting really close to the end, so I think this is a good place to stop. We'll start from Sukkot next time, because there's no way I can finish this chapter today. But the Rambam's going to finish going through all of the laws and the various, so on in this chapter. It's going to be pretty quick. We'll run through it pretty quick. But there's a couple places where we're going to stop because he's going to say some points that are very interesting. So hang in there. It's just going to still have a lot of good stuff left. Anyway, we have a couple minutes to have discussion. If anyone wants to contribute, discuss, ask, comment, argue.
Yes, okay.
I have a quick question. Does the rest of this guide devote itself to this kind of explanation of all the commandments? Do we get kind of a...
Well, the next, I don't know, maybe 5 chapters does. There are some which start getting a little hairy. Like, these are very easy, and the Rambam tells us they're easy. Like Pesach, you kind of know. You don't need that's why he didn't even bother giving a whole explanation about what the purpose of Pesach is, because but there's going to be some. But yeah, the next, I think it goes all the way up to chapter like 48 or 49, where he gives reasons for things, and then he's going to have a few chapters of conclusion, which are obviously going to be interesting. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers the thing.
Yeah. No, admittedly, this isn't the most exciting chapter in the Rambam, but we study everything and we learn from everything. That's my rule. I'm not skipping anything. Any other questions? Well, the main interesting thing, the main point you want to go away with is as follows: that according to the Rambam, right, and this is very important, I believe, all of the mitzvot of the Torah have logical, reasonable explanations that don't require any spiritual heebie-jeebies to explain it, right? There's no mention of sparks of holiness. There's no mention of angels. There's no mention of what beauty things happen in the celestial spheres when we do mitzvot on this world. Not a single mention of that. And there's a reason for that, and it's extremely well calculated, right? The Rambam is trying to explain that the Torah makes sense. Now, and he's going to do his best to say that every single mitzvah of the Torah makes logical sense on this world that we live in, that you and I experience and live in every day. That's his goal over here. And as we continue to go through these reasons, we'll see how he attempts to make that happen. And we've already seen in some cases where he tried to make sense out of things that didn't seem to make sense at all in the first place, but he gave his suggestions. So that's the one main point that we really have to get from this. All right, if that's it, then that's it. Okay. So next week we'll continue chapter 43, and we will continue with Sukkot, and yeah, it should be fun. All right. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Saul.
You're welcome. Bye bye.